Hello, welcome again to C. Anderson English. This is part 2 of my video going over Seamus Heaney's follower. If it's useful, please subscribe. Please hit the thumbs up if you also think it's useful. These kind of things are really helpful in terms of validating the channel. Thanks so much. Right, so we talked about in part 1 and annotated the first part of this poem, the first 3 stanzas. And in this video, I'm going to look at the second 3 stanzas, or the second half of this text, and go over it. And it is a fantastic poem. It's a really good poem in terms of getting to the grips of some of the difficulties in father-son or just maybe parent-child relationships. So anyway, let's get straight to this. So after talking about how fantastic his father is in terms of his job and how adept he is, what we have here is that we then get some first-person perspective, and it says this is the first time that we really have the narrator's viewpoint. Now, this poem is from the collection Death of a Naturalist, which is a semi-autobiographical, if not fully autobiographical, collection of poems. The narrator here certainly expresses himself, and it says, "I stumbled." And this is really the first time we get some negativity in this poem. Before, all descriptions were all about being good at your job, or being focused, or being proficient, but here we have some negativity. I stumbled, and he doesn't just stumble, he stumbles because of the hobnailed wake of his father. And it's a lovely description here. So the hobnailed refers to the boots. So again, for me, this is an image of masculinity. It's certainly an image, and I think so. I would say it's masculinity because of you need the hobnail boots for protection because you're doing a manual job, so a job that requires strength or working with the land as opposed to some kind of academic job. And we know that Seamus Heaney himself, in different poems, expresses how his profession is so different to that of his forefathers. So he says, "I stumbled in his hobnailed wake," and again we have this reference to some nautical imagery. A wake is the sort of aftermath of a ship. So you might have a little boat that's going in the sea. This is the sea, and then you have the kind of tracks that it leaves. And if you're here in a dinghy or something in a smaller vessel, which I imagine the metaphor is that he is smaller, then he is being destabilized by this wake. So this is the first example of negativity, and we see now that the father is having a negative effect on Heaney. He says, "I stumbled in his hobnailed wake, fell sometimes." Again, this destabilized verb. We've got stumbled, we had fell, sometimes on the polished sod. So because his father's turned over the sod and we now have the underlayer being exposed on top, it's again a metaphor for being polished. Again, this relates to being an expert, like everything being shiny and fantastic. On the polished sod, sometimes he rode me on his back, dipping and rising to his plod. I haven't talked much about the rhyme, but we have this kind of loose rhyme scheme here. We have the A of wake, the B of sod, the A of back. It doesn't really go actually, you could call that C. And then we have plod and sod, so we have a full rhyme here. We have some interesting rhymes further up as well, in terms of wing and sock and pluck. You have half rhymes, breaking, wing. So the rhyme scheme is not quite full, and that's something to think about. You want to think about why that is. Is that because perhaps the narrator is not yet mastered his art of poetry, or is it intentional? That's something for you to really get your teeth into and express some of your ideas. Sometimes he rode on his back, dipping and rising to his plod. So for me, that's a nice image. It's this contrast between this negativity to then him riding on his back. And I think any father would want to, ride his son on his back. And, I can remember going on my dad's back and having time in my life. So I think, again, it comes back to they have a good relationship. And then it says, "I wanted to grow up and plough, to close one eye, stiffen my arm. All I ever did was follow in his broad shadow round the farm." Wanted, past tense. I wanted to grow up and plough. So when he was younger, he wanted to be like his father, to close one eye. So he wants to emulate, he wants to be exactly like his father. And if you look at part 1 of this video, I do talk about some celebrities and think about, do you want to emulate the person you aspire to be like, or do you want to be your own person, your own version of that? To close one eye, stiffen my arm. All I ever did was follow. This is almost missing a but. All I ever did was follow. Is there some resentment there? Or is that a statement of fact? All I ever did was follow, and again, the enjambment here as I've said before, the enjambment emphasises the word follow. The poem is called Follower, and it's the idea that he doesn't ever do anything himself. It seems like he's sort of stagnating. All I ever did was follow in his broad shadow round the farm. Okay, so my classes here, we talked a lot about this. We talked about how the word shadow is it's in the darkness. It's away from the limelight. You're not the focus, and it would be cold. It wouldn't be a pleasant place to be in. And again, his masculinity is emphasised by the fact that it's a broad shadow. You know, that his father, he's got these globing shoulders, and so he's a fantastic specimen of a man. So again, that helps to kind of maybe lower the esteem, or to give Heaney a bit of a complex. Then if you look at the bottom, it starts to change a little bit more, and he says, I was a nuisance. Again, these last three stanzas all using the first person. I was a nuisance, tripping, falling, yapping. Again, it's a tiny animal would yap, or something that just talks endlessly. So again, this kind of self-deprecation, I think, stems from the fact that the father is so much to compete with. I was a nuisance, tripping, falling, yapping always, but today, and this is interesting, this is a massive tonal shift for me, but today it is my father who keeps stumbling behind me and will not go away. That for me is a part of the poem you just don't see coming. You just don't expect that to happen. This kind of, it's almost like an afterthought, but the end of this poem is very negative. But today it is my father who keeps stumbling. A lot of my students talk about this role reversal. Behind me and will not go away. This idea of the father being a burden, perhaps like he was earlier on in the poem. Now, you want to think about why this is. Is this because Mr. Heaney even has become a famous poet, and he's now having to provide financially for his father? There's so many reasons about this ending to the poem. But this poem is really about living in the shadow of your father or someone who's close to you, and trying to establish yourself away from that shadow and become your own person. Now, so I think that's something we can all identify with. And if you look at this last section here, you might want to think about the idea, should our parents be our main role models? And how do you feel when people make comparisons between you and other members of your family, if that's happened? Pause the video and think about that. Have some personal engagement with this poem. I hope that's been useful to you. If you like my channel, please subscribe. Please hit that thumbs up, and there are links to more videos here as well.